But it really surprises me that New Zealand writers very rarely position their stories, position their writing, position their research in a much more international context. And so much of the work that's going on in this country continues to be very much grounded in who we are in this place. Now that, of course, is important. Of course it is important that we have a strong sense of our national identity, a strong sense of who we are and that we are telling our story. That is true. But if that is the only narrative, the only story in this country, and we're not reflecting in our writing, in our research, the reality that New Zealanders need to engage with the world, and that our success is very much built on the success of that international engagement, then the stories are not reflecting the future of Aotearoa New Zealand. The stories are not reflecting the attitudes and engagement that will make us successful. And why should you care? Why should you care? Because if New Zealand is not prosperous, if New Zealand does not succeed, you will not grow your businesses, you will not grow your wealth, and that is important for the reasons I outlined at the beginning in terms of being able to fund and support the future growth and direction of the industry. So that was the first thing. We need to look out more. The second thing is that we need as a nation to be willing to take more risk. We need as a nation to understand that risk-taking and entrepreneurship is at the heart of our future success. And you know, whether you can talk about the entrepreneurs in this country, and there are many of them, who are successful and are serial and are committed, and every time they pick up and fail, they stand themselves up again, dust themselves off and start again. But you and I know that the attitudes in this country towards risk-taking are deeply ambivalent. You and I know that in our communities, in our business world, in our political world, risk-taking is very much looked down on. It is very much stand on the sidelines and wait for things to fail. It's very much the enthusiasm for taking the pot shot at the person who's dared to take a risk and fail. The headlines are full of those sort of crash and burn stories. The headlines are not celebrating the fact that people are trying to do things differently. People are trying to engage in a different way with the world or with their markets or with their readers in the context of your industry, and celebrating the reality of those stories. So risk-taking is critically important. And here's the pivot around risk-taking. If you're going to take risks, you are going to fail. And I can talk about that personally, having taken numerous risks in my business life and having failed numerous times, but always in a culture where people were prepared to support me through that, were prepared to pick me up and say, what's the learning from this failure? How can we ensure we don't do it again? How can we ensure that we learn from that and take our organisation forward? So attitudinally, in my view, we need to absolutely make a shift. And there are particular attitudes that underpin the New Zealand psyche at the moment which do need to be shifted. Those are attitudes towards wealth creation which is not seen in this country, as you know, as something which is particularly desirable. People tend to think that people who are wealthy, the only question is really what rort is it that's derived that wealth, rather than celebrating the fact that you have worked till midnight, that you have managed your stock well, that you have understood your customer base, that you have priced successfully in a highly competitive market, and that you're actually offering a service to customers which they are buying, which creates that wealth. And we need to change that mindset. Although, of course, that's a controversial observation, but I've been asked to be controversial today, so I'm happy to do that. The second attitude that I think we need to change is our attitude to growth in this country. So often we see growth as being inimical to sustainability. So often growth is seen as putting pressure on resources, putting pressure on the community, putting pressure on the land. We're not able to sustain it. The reality, as you and I know, is that it is quite possible to sustain growth in this country and sustain the country itself. And the truth is that if this country is not growing, if we're not embracing attitudes or investment or whatever it might be, the seeds necessary to support growth, then we will be going backwards. And this is not simply an academic exercise from my perspective. It's not simply an exercise, some book learning or some political sloganing or whatever it might be. The reality is that growth matters because it matters, in my terms, to create a future for my children, as it does for you and your family. So it's not simply about creating your customer base of the future. It's about creating a society which is sustainable and can support your business into the future. In the end, the thing which matters most, in my view, is very much the need for New Zealanders to stand up for the things that are important to the future of this country and this industry and engage in debate. At the heart of New Zealand's value proposition, at the heart of our value proposition on the world stage, is the quality of our thinking. The quality of our thinking. Now, you can tell me that we don't have a competitive advantage in thinking, and you may be right on any sort of empirical analysis of that. But the reality is that as a small country, as an educated country in many, many respects, with a strong history of entrepreneurism and entrepreneurial thought, New Zealand has been able to craft original thinking and project that onto the world stage. I'll just give you one very quick example. The Global Research Alliance was probably the only good thing to come out of the Copenhagen summit in relation to climate change. It's an alliance which was grown from this country. It's an alliance, an international alliance of scientists focused on managing the climate impacts of agriculture. And New Zealand recognised that we needed to be at the heart of that conversation if we were going to support strong agricultural growth in this country moving forward. And so we started that conversation. We've led it. We've taken it onto the world stage. We've now got about 24 countries engaged in it, and we're right in the middle of a conversation that matters to us. So we can have original thinking and original ideas. But here's the thing. For this country to have ideas leadership, we have to have a country which is open to new thinking. We have to have a country which is diverse in its thinking. Why? Because sameness kills creativity. Because sameness does not generate the energy and the passion necessary to drive new thinking and new ideas. And at the heart of our ability to do that is the ability of our communities to engage in new thinking, new ideas, worlds that are opened up to them by books. Worlds that are opened up to them not only in terms of imagination, but worlds that are opened up to them in terms of different strands of thinking around the world, different ways in which ideas might be presented. And where are those books being written in this country now? Where are those books that talk really about where we are and how we need to be, that debate the points that matter in our society? You'll read them in blogs. You'll read them on the internet. You'll see them online. You'll occasionally get references to them in academic treatises. I'm nothing against academic treatises, but they take a bit of reading. But the reality is that not much of what's being written in this country actually grabs hold of the issues that are fundamental to how we are going to go forward. Now, if I look at the books that we celebrated on Friday, you might debate that with me. And that's fine, I'm happy to have the debate. Because you could say to me, well, Judith Binney's exposition on Tūhoe was at the heart of that conversation that is going on between Tūhoe and the Crown. And many of you will have noted with some irony that Chris Finlayson, who's a good friend of mine and a good friend of this industry, who happens to be the Treaty Negotiations Minister, that had been at the heart of that particular conversation with Tūhoe, ended up presenting the award to Judith that night. That is a conversation that matters. But it's a conversation which is part of our story, not all of our story. If you think about Brian Turner's poetry, if you think about Brian Turner's poetry in the particular piece that Elizabeth Smithers read out the other night, where he says, leaving is the hardest thing for me and coming home the easiest. Now, I'm not a poet, so I'm paraphrasing Brian, which is a bad thing to do. But nonetheless, that theme which is about here and not there, which is about the wonder of this place and the challenge of offshore. And in my mind, we've just got to get ourselves actively involved in a wider dialogue and a wider debate. Glenn Colquhoun, I just thought, just bit more poetry. Glenn Colquhoun, who I think is one of the more wonderful poets that's writing at the moment, in that wonderful book of poetry that you've sold heaps of and you've all got on the shelves, The Art of Walking Upright, haven't you? It's magnificent. I've bought lots of them and given them away. And that poet, the poem by that name, he has this wonderful line where he says, the art of standing upright here, that is here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is the art of standing on 2 feet. One is for holding on, the other is for letting go. And what I'm trying to describe to you, whether for New Zealand or for our industry, is that we have to absolutely anchor ourselves in the things that are good about this place, in the history of this place. We have to be able to stand firmly here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But we have to be able to step forward. We have to be able to step beyond our shores. We have to be able to position our authors for success on the international stage. We have to get stories written that reflect the reality of our international engagement. We need our New Zealanders reading far more than they are now. We need to break down the barriers that socioeconomics and positioning and all of those things have that constrain readers. We need to get people writing in te reo to make these stories more accessible. But let's make sure that we don't, in anchoring ourselves in this place, forget to step forward. And let's make sure, most importantly, that we as an industry, that we as advocates for reading, for ideas, for debate, are prepared to stand. Are prepared to stand and challenge those. Challenge those who say that reading is dead and we are dead men walking. Challenge those... That was your line, wasn't it, Hamish? Sorry, I didn't... Oh, it wasn't yours. It was attributed to you. Media can never be trusted. Except those, any that are here. We need to stand. And we need to say that the young people of this country have enormous potential. And we need to support them in exploiting that potential. We need to say that the young people of this country that aren't reading at the moment have enormous potential to be readers and be engaged in the future conversation, and we need to support them. And the story is simply this, that it's about booksellers, it's about publishers, it's about readers, it's about business, it's about politicians, it's about communities, it's about libraries, it's about all of us understanding that the heart of the future of this country is in the stories we are telling. That the stories we tell, the narrative we write about this country, whether in poetic or literature forms, is the way in which our future will be defined. And that story is being written. That story is emerging and changing. It is a story which is founded in the biculturalism and history of this place, which is anchored in a respect for that history. But it is a story of enormous vigour, enormous opportunity, enormous international and intellectual engagement. And it is a story which, with your support and that of your industry, we can ensure will be successful and will drive a successful New Zealand, and in doing so, a successful New Zealand book industry. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai, tēnā koutou katoa.